I can say without a shadow of a doubt that this album is an absolute game changer. This is one that's going to shake the foundation of the musical industry based on the technicality, the know-how. There's so much expression and so much like experimentation that's found on here, and everything works on it. And yeah, this is not Kairos' new record. This is Grace Hayhurst's debut LP. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, let's dive into this one then. The World is Dying by Grace Hayhurst. So, if you don't know about Grace Hayhurst, you know, she's a great friend of mine. So, I need to put my biases kind of at the door and remind myself about that. But UK multi-instrumentalist. Yeah, she's kind of been in and around the prog community for quite a while. She put out an EP of Existence is Temporary a few years back, which I really, really loved. It kind of showcased the promise. It showcased, some of the ideas and the technicality that she's had. She's worked in and around the prog community for a while, guest starring here and there. This is kind of like her first full-length album, her real statement. All of her other albums with, Existence is Temporary, as well as The Battle Between Myself and My Brain, something along those lines. She's always tackling something that's pretty heavy, with the battle with myself and my brain. It's very, tackling mental health and the self-doubt and always attacking yourself. With Existence is Temporary, it's, the mortality of man. It's we're all going to die one day. And here on The Earth is Dying, we're covering that same kind of happy-go-lucky, joyful concepts of we as a human species are actively destroying the world. And we seem to be okay with that. Like, we seem to be just fine with, utilizing all the resources that this planet has for profit, and just being fine with literally setting it on fire and being like, yeah, well, millionaires and billionaires got to afford their third or fourth yacht. So why would we want to stop that when everything else is on fire? Like, I'm recording this during the first heat wave of the summer, and it's only, halfway through June. So yeah, things are going to get worse before they get better. So, that all being the landscape of this record, the music styles are as you would expect from Grace at this point. If you've listened to her EPs and you've listened to her kind of singles, they're very guitar and keyboard driven. They kind of blend the landscape between rock and metal within a progressive rock landscape. Her technicality and her songwriting is really top-notch. I'm not just saying that as a friend, but I'm saying that as a musical critic. She is so good at constructing these songs and knowing when to emphasize certain things. Not only are the musical chops on display, but also her programming and her mastering, like behind the kit, being the producer on this record. I believe she's the producer. Could be wrong. She'll let me know if I'm wrong. But I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I know she poured her heart and soul into this record. And we see this off of the single of this record, the title track of The World is Dying, immediately blending genres. It starts off very somber, very quiet, but then explodes with that kind of really punch of guitar licks, of keyboards. One or the other isn't necessarily the star of the show. They are always complementing one another and always lifting one another up. And it is quite fun to hear. And it's always great to see that, Grace is basically just lifting herself up in this case. But knowing that she knows when to use the keyboards, when to use the guitars, and there are moments that I'm like, oh, this has the flavor of past artists that, I've grown to love. We've got Frost, we've got Spock's Beard, we've got these other modern progressive rock artists that I can see this is where the influence comes from. But at no point do I ever think, oh, she's ripping them off, or oh, she's leaning on them on a crutch, which is so easy to do in this style of progressive rock where, that's almost the name of the game. It's always how well can we hide our influences rather than how can we stand on our own 2 feet. And I always feel like Grace is doing that very much on her own. And that's also continued on with the third track of And It's Our Fault. This is kind of like a call and response with the first 2 tracks, The World is Dying and It's Our Fault, to create about 14 and a half minutes worth of music. And that's one of the things that I love about progressive rock. It's these soaring landscapes, these larger than life scales, and I am really much along for the ride the entire time. So yeah, if you're a fan of that more aggressive, more in-your-face, more powerful kind of progressive metal and progressive rock, I think you're really going to love this, especially on the fourth track of Us Versus Them. It has this aggressive tone to it. It's got this antagonistic charge. It's like, come at me, bro, kind of an idea. But it's got that within the guitars and within the keyboard work that I really, really enjoy. And I love that Grace is able to also handle a little bit more of a mellow track on the fifth track of Our Forest, the Earth. She's able to create a little bit more of a somber overall flavor, but there still has this powerhouse punch near the midpoint. It's able to blend the more mellow aspects, a little bit more of the atmospheric tones with these very aggressive guitar and keyboard licks near the midway point. And this is continued with Takeoff, and this is where I want to appreciate Grace within her rhythm styles as well. Like, the drumming is just fantastic. I love that it is able to be bombastic, it's able to be a powerhouse, but also being technical and being very, like, in your face, and, it's able to blend a lot of different genres and a lot of different styles without it being too in your face, too crazy, too, otherworldly, while still being able to be the root of the song. I think everybody's really going to appreciate the seventh track, the 12-minute epic of Revolution. This is kind of where it all kind of comes together within the album itself. It's taking everything that's come before and like really analyzing it and really blossoming it out. And this is where I'm talking about where Grace knows how to construct a fantastic track. Within this 12 minutes, we have a lot of ebbs and flows. And at no point does one ever feel disjointed. And this is where I'm always saying, this long track doesn't quite work because it feels very disjointed. This one, even though it has those ebbs and flows, it has this continuing connected tissue that leads the track through from start to finish. And I cannot help but praise, because it's so rare to find a really strong, longer progressive rock track that has this connected tissue from start to finish. And this is especially important when there doesn't seem to be this reprisal of themes. A track like this would have, a beginning and then a reprisal and then a final, reprieve at the very end. And this one just kind of goes from section to section to section while building upon the last. So it's more of a building upon what came before, to build upon what came before, to have all these satisfying build-ups and payoffs. And that is one of the reasons why I love progressive rock, and that's one of the reasons why I love this album. The last two tracks are very much closers of this record. The second last track, Armistice, I believe it is, Armistice, you're going to let me know how to pronounce that, is really just kind of like a closing of the curtain. It's kind of like a little bit of a come down after it, and I feel like Absent Friends feels like a Devin Townsend Kai track, like something like, the big epic has happened and we just need a little bit of a breath of fresh air, and I think it closes the album off very, very well. So yeah, it's hard not to praise this record. I do think that this album is actually a triumph. I wasn't joking at the beginning. I do think that this album is going to go places. If there were any concerns or anything that I would improve upon, the only thing that I could see people being a little frustrated about is Grace's vocal works. It's very unique. There is an aspect of it that, there isn't this kind of familiarity right from the get-go about it. She has a very unique singing style, and where I see a lot of people being very frustrated with that or thinking that it's, maybe get a different singer on there. I think that once you kind of digest and, get used to the singing styles on it, it does actually advance the music forward quite a bit, and it provides a signature sound that nobody else is doing. So in that case, I can't necessarily fault it, because I'm always looking for what is the standout, what sets this album apart. I do actually enjoy Grace's more harsher singing styles that we found on Revolution on that, the big epic of this track. And I almost wish she did that a little bit more to kind of set her apart a little bit, because that has a vocal stylings that I really appreciate and I really like. I would say that maybe a little bit more harmonization would be really nice. I do think that this album also suffers from a little bit of the same, if I'm being perfectly honest. I'm no albums without criticism, and I gotta, at least come up with something. But like tracks like Us Versus Them and Our Forest, Our Earth, they do a little bit tread water. I don't think that there's quite enough personality, say within those 2 tracks that really elevate them into something that hadn't already been done before. But again, when you're playing around a pool that I enjoy swimming in so much, I don't mind that we're kind of covering the same waters that we were already swimming in before and after. So yeah, I was being really hard pressed to try to figure out something that I had to knock against this record, because, you know, no album, well, I shouldn't say no album is perfect. We have Selling England by the Pound, but very few records are perfect. And, you know, this one is one of those flawed masterpieces. So in that case, I will say at the end of the day for this record, The World is Dying by Grace Hayhurst is an album that I would absolutely pick up in physical format. If you're a fan of progressive rock, if you're a lover of metal and rock music overall, I think you really need to check out this record. You know, it's a lot of fun, is what I'll say for sure. I had a great time with it, and every time I came to this record, I always look forward to, you know, discovering new things, because Grace is a master of putting these small things into the album that you don't notice upon your first listen. You know, yeah, it needs a couple more listens into it, and you're like, oh, I didn't realize that motif was there, or oh, I didn't realize that she was doing that in the background. So yeah, this is one that will need multiple listens, and each one is more enjoyable than the last. So yeah, love this record. I think you guys should check it out. It gets the note seal of approval for sure. And I'm not just saying that because Grace and I are chums. I'm saying that because this really is a great record. So go and check this one out. I highly recommend that you do. And when you do, please let me know if you loved it, if you hated it, by commenting down below. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys for today. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.